In July 2002, Michael Jackson appeared before cameras at a press conference with a calm tone but an accusation that would cause an earthquake in the music industry. At that moment, he wasn't promoting a new album or celebrating a sales success. Instead, he was denouncing Sony Music and its then president, Tommy Mottola, accusing them of sabotage, racism, and manipulation. His words echoed powerfully. He claimed to be fighting against a powerful corporation that, according to him, exploited artists and tried to destroy his career. Shortly afterward, the spotlight that once praised him began to dim, and in its place emerged shadows, doubts, and a sequence of events that would never be seen the same way again. Jackson's allegations, initially met with skepticism by the mainstream media, became entangled with questionable business decisions, disputes over copyrights, and a series of controversial posthumous releases. Court documents, archived interviews, and the label's own history reveal cracks that feed something bigger than a contractual disagreement. From then on, a new narrative began to take shape, raising questions about the true extent of the disputes between artists and corporations. If the most famous artist on the planet believed he was being silenced, what really happened behind the scenes of his last great battle? Welcome to another night where the mysteries never sleep. I'm Midnight, and this is 7 Nights. Before we begin, I'd like to ask for your help. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's just one click, but it makes a huge difference in helping YouTube deliver the videos to more people and allowing me to keep bringing this content to you. I'm counting on you. Let's get to the video. In 2001, Michael Jackson released Invincible, his first studio album since history in 1995. The investment was massive, about $30 million, dozens of producers involved, and tracks carefully chosen over 4 years. But unlike what was expected from a project of that magnitude, something strange happened. There was virtually no promotion. There was no massive campaign, no world tour, nor the traditional schedule of single and music video releases. For an artist of Jackson's caliber, this immediately drew attention. The label responsible for the album was Sony Music, and it was difficult to understand why such an expensive album was being released with so little support. Michael Jackson began to speak out publicly about the matter. According to him, Sony was intentionally sabotaging the project. The accusations included blocking music videos, prematurely ending promotion, and most notably, refusing to release a charity song called What More Can I Give, created in response to the September 11th attacks. That song had been recorded with a constellation of stars, including Mariah Carey, Beyoncé, and Celine Dion. The goal was to raise funds for the victims of the attack. Sony never officially released the track, citing contractual issues. But the question remains, why was a humanitarian song with such big names involved blocked? This was one of the first pieces of evidence Jackson used to point out that the label had stopped acting as a partner. From that moment on, the label's behavior began to be closely scrutinized. Invincible sold about 13 million copies worldwide. For any other artist, this would have been a success. But curiously, the industry treated the numbers as a failure. The comparison with Thriller, which surpassed 100 million, was constant. Jackson began to be referenced with a tone of decline, as if his time had passed. But if the album had significant sales even without promotion, what would have happened if the label had done its part? The contract between Jackson and Sony involved something rare. He was co-owner of Sony/ATV, the publisher that controlled the copyrights of thousands of songs, including the Beatles catalog. This gave Jackson an unusual position in the industry, with direct access to the heart of the business, music rights. And here comes a delicate point. If Jackson, who had accumulated significant debt, became financially vulnerable, Sony had contractual means to take over his share of the catalog. That clause existed. If the artist defaulted, the label could absorb control of the asset. In light of this, the idea began to gain traction that the commercial disinterest in Invincible wasn't just a marketing mistake, but part of a strategy to weaken his financial position. Could this be the explanation for the silence surrounding such an expensive album? Another element that drew attention was the absence of a tour. Since the 1980s, every Michael Jackson album had been followed by a world tour, which helped boost sales and increase exposure. With Invincible, that didn't happen. The label cited health and logistical issues, but Jackson himself continued making appearances at events, indicating that he hadn't completely withdrawn from the stage. So why was there no tour? Even the songs from the album, such as Speechless, Butterflies, and Whatever Happens, were later re-evaluated by fans and experts as high-quality tracks. There was no controversy surrounding the lyrics or any elements that would justify caution in releasing them. This raises a simple question. If the songs were good and the artist still had global appeal, why didn't the label treat the project as a priority? Media coverage at the time reinforced the idea of detachment. Instead of discussing the music, outlets focused on personal aspects of Jackson's life. Appearance, behavior, rumors. Everything seemed to divert attention from what he wanted to present to the public. This contributed to the narrative that Invincible was released, but never truly delivered to the public as it should have been. Over time, the absence of clear answers only deepened the mystery. Sony never officially addressed the exact reasons for the promotional cut. And even after Jackson's death, this chapter remained open. Fans continued to search for answers, and the industry never explained why one of the most expensive albums of all time was treated with such indifference. In the end, why would anyone invest so much in an album and then let it disappear in silence? In July 2002, Michael Jackson took the stage at an event in New York to make a statement that caught the music industry by surprise. With a microphone in hand in front of cameras and fans, he called the then president of Sony Music, Tommy Mottola, a devil and a racist. The remark caused an immediate shock. Mottola's name, until then associated with the success of artists like Mariah Carey, Jennifer Lopez, and Celine Dion, began circulating in a new context, that of an executive accused of abusing his power behind the scenes of the music world. Jackson claimed that Mottola exploited black artists and cited names like Sammy Davis Jr. and James Brown as examples. He said there was a deeply rooted system of manipulation, where contracts were used as traps and creative freedom was suppressed. The impact was immediate. Some of the press treated his words as exaggerated. Others began revisiting old cases. After all, was Jackson just another dissatisfied artist, or was there something more behind his accusations? Amid all this, the name of Mariah Carey began to surface frequently. She, who was also managed by Mottola, and was even his wife, had suffered an emotional breakdown the previous year, in 2001. In later interviews, Carey suggested she had lived in an oppressive relationship, marked by excessive control, constant monitoring, and unilateral decisions in her career. She even said she felt like a prisoner in a golden mansion. Although she never directly endorsed Jackson's words, what she described helped build a picture in which his allegations no longer seemed so isolated. There's also the episode involving Jackson's attempt to release the charity song What More Can I Give, which was blocked by Sony. According to the singer, Mottola was personally behind the decision. He believed it was part of a broader campaign to undermine his public image and cut off his reach. This wasn't just a contractual dispute. It was presented as a fight over principles, or at least, that's how Jackson wanted it to be seen. His speech, however, wasn't just aimed at one person. It was against the system. By attacking Mottola, Jackson was shining a light on something bigger. The way artists, especially black artists, had historically been treated by the industry. Many had contracts that limited their choices, blocked releases, or prevented them from reclaiming their own copyrights. Jackson wanted to turn his denunciation into a symbol. But was the world ready to listen? From Sony's side, the response was swift and direct. They called the accusations ludicrous, offensive, and false. There was no public investigation, nor an in-depth debate on major networks. The matter was treated as an isolated outburst, while Jackson continued to be portrayed as eccentric and unstable. But did that narrative prevail simply because it was more convenient for everyone involved? Tommy Mottola's history shows an ambitious executive, known for tough decisions and an authoritarian profile. He led Sony during a period of massive growth, turning the company into a global giant. But backstage accounts, especially from the 90s and early 2000s, indicate that his management style was often marked by intimidation and total control over artists. This, by itself, is not proof of misconduct, but it contributes to a complex image, which Jackson laid bare with a single speech. It's worth remembering that, after the accusations, Mottola remained in his position for a few more months before stepping down as president of Sony Music in January 2003. The departure was announced as friendly and planned, but the timing raises questions. Was it a strategic coincidence or a silent response to the damage to his image? The company never linked his departure to Jackson's statements, but for many, it was hard to ignore the sequence of events. In the midst of all this, Jackson became even more isolated from the mainstream media. His appearances decreased, his credibility was questioned, and the narrative that he was paranoid began to circulate strongly. But if he were just trying to draw attention, why would he risk his relationship with one of the biggest record labels in the world? What artist would gamble that much just out of vanity? This chapter of the story doesn't offer direct answers, but it raises uncomfortable questions. Jackson didn't just accuse one man. He targeted a structure, and that structure responded not with investigations, but with silence. In the end, what remained were neither proofs nor retractions, only the lingering doubt about who really controlled the narrative in that power game. In 1985, Michael Jackson did something no one expected. He purchased the ATV catalog, which included none other than the Beatles songs. This acquisition made the pop star the legal owner of part of Lennon and McCartney's work. A bold move, with a price tag of nearly $50 million. But what initially seemed like just a business decision gradually revealed itself as the center of a silent battle. A battle over power, control, and billions. Years later, Jackson merged that catalog with Sony's, creating Sony/ATV. He retained a 50% stake, which placed him in a unique position, both artist and partner. But being at the top comes with a price. Over time, Jackson accumulated substantial debt and began using his share of the catalog as collateral for loans. This created a calculated and very well-structured risk in the contract. If he failed to repay, Sony could take control. A detail that, for many, was never just a contractual technicality. It was part of a larger game. Now stop and think about this: a black artist, owner of the Beatles catalog, sharing power with one of the largest corporations on the planet. That was not common. And more than that, it wasn't welcomed by everyone. Jackson found himself in an uncomfortable position for the system. He was too autonomous, too outspoken. In the eyes of some structures, he was less of an artist and more of an obstacle. Between 2000 and 2005, Jackson's debts soared. Estimates point to figures around $270 million. Much of this debt was tied to properties, legal costs, and his lifestyle. But what supported it all was always the same: his stake in Sony/ATV. The catalog was his greatest asset and his greatest vulnerability. And when you hold something that valuable in your hands, everything around you starts revolving around it. It's at this point that the boycott of Invincible, mentioned by Jackson, takes on another weight. Because we're not just talking about music. We're talking about market value, public perception, and revenue-generating capacity. If Jackson lost power, who stood to gain? If his name stopped being profitable, what happened to his share of the catalog? And what if this weakening wasn't just a consequence, but part of a subtle strategy? After Jackson's death in 2009, the gears didn't stop turning. In 2016, his share of Sony/ATV was sold to the group for $750 million. Then in 2024, another portion of the rights was again negotiated with Sony, this time for $600 million. On both occasions, the family tried to stop it. Katherine Jackson, his mother, even filed lawsuits, claiming it went against her son's wishes. Still, the deals went ahead, and with each signed contract, the catalog's control returned to the hands of the corporation. Fans reacted. For many, it wasn't just about money. It was about everything Jackson had symbolized. He didn't buy that catalog by accident. He used music as a shield, as an affirmation of independence. Watching that legacy slip away through the legal cracks of contracts and administrative decisions was, for many, like witnessing the machine's victory over the artist. There's a curious point in this story. Paul McCartney tried for years to regain the rights to the Beatles songs. He tried directly with Jackson, he tried in court. He never succeeded. Jackson held control until the end. But when he died, and the estate began making deals, Sony repositioned itself with agility. In less than a decade, everything had changed hands. And with that, much was silenced. Michael knew what he had in his hands. And perhaps that's why he was so afraid of losing it. In interviews, he said the catalog was his greatest protection. But he also knew it was what made him most vulnerable. When an artist holds something that many would like to control, he becomes a piece outside the board. Hard to predict, hard to dominate. And in this kind of game, time, contracts, and silence can be worth more than any musical note. In the end, The catalog he protected so fiercely returned to the system he tried to fight. And the question that remains is as uncomfortable as it is inevitable. Did Michael lose this game because of financial imbalance, or because he was never allowed to win? One year after Michael Jackson's death, in 2010, the world was introduced to a new album, Michael. The release promised unreleased tracks and never-before-heard vocals from the king of pop. It was the first posthumous project, released by Sony in partnership with the artist's estate. But within the first few days, something felt off, and not just between the lines. Longtime fans began questioning something fundamental. Was that really Michael Jackson's voice? 3 tracks in particular raised suspicion: Breaking News, Monster, and Keep Your Head Up. In forums, videos, and social media, thousands of listeners said the vocals didn't sound authentic. The tone, the pronunciation, even the vocal mannerisms seemed distant from Michael's style. Quickly, a theory gained traction. Some of the songs had allegedly been recorded by Jason Malachi, a singer who had previously imitated Jackson in other settings. The accusation moved beyond mere fan speculation. Michael's family members, including his nephews and even his mother, Catherine, publicly stated that the recordings were not real. will.i.am, producer and friend of the singer, also criticized the album, saying that Michael would never have approved its release. Now think about it. How could a project of this magnitude be released without a rigorous verification of vocal authenticity? The case ended up in court. In 2014, a group of consumers sued Sony and the estate for fraud, claiming they had been deceived into buying an album with allegedly fake vocals. In 2018, the California Supreme Court agreed to hear the case. During the process, Sony's lawyers even claimed they could not confirm with certainty who had sung on the tracks in question. This statement marked a breaking point. If even the label didn't know for sure, who did? Jason Malachi, the name most frequently cited as the possible vocal substitute, denied involvement on several occasions, but years later leaks resurfaced that reignited the suspicion. He even ambiguously admitted that he had recorded vocals similar to Jackson's at the request of third parties. Still, there has never been a formal confirmation of his involvement in the Michael album, and that keeps the doubt alive to this day. Some say that the pressure to monetize Jackson's legacy was so great that certain boundaries were ignored. After all, a posthumous release from an artist of this caliber represented millions in revenue. But if that profit was built on songs he never sang, what does that say about the relationship between art, legacy, and the market? Curiously, Michael, the album, was launched with full fanfare, cover art by Kadir Nelson, global advertising campaigns, and an emotional narrative of revival. But as the controversy gained momentum, the label avoided addressing the suspicious tracks directly. Instead of clarifying, they kept the focus on other songs in the project, as if ignoring the doubt would be enough to erase it. The 3 most contested tracks were gradually sidelined. They were not included in later compilations, nor celebrated in official materials. In 2022, they were quietly removed from digital platforms. No annoncement, no explanation. As if, by being deleted, the controversy would also vanish. But for those who followed it from the beginning, the gesture had another effect. It confirmed the discomfort. Whether due to haste, commercial pressure, or poor judgment, the fact remains that the Michael album became a symbol of the dilemma that arises when the voice of an artist is no longer present, and yet continues to be used. Who decides what is authentic when the creator is no longer here to say yes or no? If even Michael Jackson's voice could be questioned, what else can be fabricated in the name of his memory? On June 25, 2009, the entire world was caught off guard by the news. Michael Jackson was dead. Cardiac arrest. Medical emergency. A home in Los Angeles. It all happened far too quickly. The first hours were filled with shock. But as the dust began to settle, one question emerged, and it never went away. How does one of the most closely watched men on the planet simply die like that? At that moment, Jackson was on the verge of returning to the stage with the This Is It tour. 50 confirmed shows in London, tickets sold out in record time. It was the comeback, the promise of redemption. He was rehearsing daily, preparing, visibly committed to proving he still had it. So how do you explain that, overnight, everything came to an end? The autopsy revealed a technical, cold term, propofol, an anesthetic used in surgeries. potent, regulated, dangerous outside hospital environments. And this was what was being administered in continuous doses just so he could sleep. The person giving it to him was his personal physician, Conrad Murray, who was later convicted of involuntary manslaughter. But let's think together. An international artist, surrounded by managers, lawyers, insurance agents, and no one knew he was being sedated with a surgical anesthetic? The justification was insomnia. But since when is insomnia treated with propofol at home? This wasn't a normal situation. And yet, it continued. He slept connected to medical equipment, woke up with difficulty, and went to rehearsals. The image was one of a triumphant return. But what was happening behind the curtain? It wasn't just a tour. It was a billion-dollar deal. There were contracts, image rights, licensed products, insurance, all hinging on the performance of one man. If he failed, many would lose. But if something happened, and the brand was reactivated another way, look at what followed. The documentary, released months after his death, grossed over $250 million. The estate profited from re-releases, partnerships, new compilations. The name Michael Jackson became, once again, one of the most valuable on the planet, even without him here. This is where the questions start to sting, because he had been warning people. For years, he spoke about manipulation, racism, control. He said he was being sabotaged. And just when he was about to reclaim his place at the top, he dies under suspicious circumstances, in his own home, under a doctor's care. You don't need a conspiracy theory for it to be unsettling. The facts alone are uncomfortable. During the trial, the narrative was straightforward. Murray was to blame. But to this day, no one has explained how that kind of treatment was allowed for so long. Where were the people responsible for protecting him? Who authorized that kind of procedure? And why, even with so many people around, did no one sound the alarm? It seems Jackson was being kept functional. Not healthy, not restored, just available. For the stage, for rehearsals, for the schedule. And if it meant pushing a little harder, that's what would be done. After all, the show had to go on. But at what cost? He had once again become valuable. But not for his music, for his absence. Michael's death activated a profit circuit that kept growing in the following years. And while that may be a common truth in the industry, in his case, the contrast is jarring. Because he said they were trying to take him out of the way. And shortly after, there was no path left at all. When someone who's been crying out for help dies, the pain doesn't come only from the loss. It comes from the doubt. Could he have survived if someone had truly listened? For years, Michael Jackson was treated as a musical phenomenon, an entertainment icon, a global reference. But there's another side to this story that few people have truly stopped to see. That of a man who spent much of his life trying to break free from the control of an industry that sold him, profited from him, but never allowed him to own himself. And when he tried to break that cycle, everything began to fall apart. Jackson bought catalogs, formed alliances, went head-to-head with record label presidents, and made public accusations that most artists would never dare to make. He didn't just want success, he wanted autonomy. But in a system where labels, publishers, marketing firms, and media channels feed off each other, someone with too much power outside the machine becomes a problem. And if that person starts pointing out the flaws, the spotlight quickly shifts elsewhere. What stands out the most is the sequence of events. After his accusations against Tommy Mottola, the claims about the Invincible album being blocked, and the battle for control of the Beatles catalog, Jackson became increasingly marginalized in the industry. The interviews vanished. The media coverage changed tone. He stopped being the king and was portrayed instead as a strange, isolated, declining man. But was that portrayal true to reality, or just convenient for those who wanted to silence the voice that was shouting? Jackson frequently spoke about unfair contracts, structural racism in the music industry, and how black artists were treated like products, disposable, replaceable, controllable. And this isn't hidden in confidential documents. It's in public videos, old interviews, recorded speeches. He said it outright, he was being silenced. And instead of investigating, they chose to ridicule him. Meanwhile, the machine kept turning. New artists were launched, business models transformed, and the music industry reorganized around the digital era. But Jackson's story remained an uncomfortable reminder. When an artist tries to take control of their own destiny, they must face a force that is not only commercial, it's political, structural, and silent. His death in 2009 closed a chapter, but it didn't resolve the conflict. On the contrary, it laid bare how legacies can be managed by others. In the following years, everything he had questioned began generating billions for those he had once accused. Re-releases, films, licensed products, as if his image could continue producing infinite profit, now without resistance, without voice, without interruption. And here lies the bitterest irony. The man who fought not to be exploited became, after his death, one of the most exploited artists of the 21st century. The control he feared was finally achieved, but only after he was no longer around to stop it. And those who hear this story from the outside, unaware of the backstage, may think it was all just a tragedy. But those who look closer see too many signs to ignore. Jackson didn't fall by accident. He challenged a structure, and that structure, little by little, took everything: the stage, the space, the reputation, and in the end, even the narrative itself. What remained was a brand, a name turned into a product, a symbol that, as powerful as it may seem, no longer had control over itself. And now that you know all these elements, the question isn't whether Michael Jackson lost, but whether he was defeated by something no artist, no matter how grand, can overcome alone. Michael Jackson wasn't just an artist who broke records. He was a man who dared to break contracts, challenge executives, question structures, and try to take control of his own destiny in a system that does not forgive those who try to break free. Every move he made off-script came at a price, and that price accumulated in silence, in closed doors, in blocked songs, in contracts that slipped from his hands, until the end, which came too soon and with too few answers. What remains in the end isn't just the music, it's the warning. When someone with such reach begins to be erased, discredited, and finally replaced, even in their own voice, what's at stake goes far beyond the show. It's about control. It's about who is allowed to exist freely within a system that turns talent into a product and personality into a threat. Michael tried to resist. He tried to warn us. And maybe after everything we've seen, the right question is no longer why did he fall, but rather, how many more will fall for trying to rise? This story is just one piece, and one day, maybe you'll see the whole puzzle. If this made you think, subscribe and like the video. It helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share it, because more voices mean more discoveries.